What's going on, guys? Ride Flawless here, and today we're going to talk about why Pokemon Stadium coming to the Nintendo Switch Online might not be the nostalgia trip that we've been waiting for. But without further ado, let's talk about what's new in the world of Pokemon. So at heart, Pokemon Stadium is a Pokemon battling simulation game. Its core focus is just battling, whether that's in single player against the AI or in multiplayer. There's no storyline, you don't train the Pokemon up, it's just simply about the battle mechanics. And the biggest issue with the Nintendo Switch Online version is that you won't be able to transfer Pokemon from other games into this game. Which is no fault of Nintendo or Game Freak. It's really just these games aren't compatible in that way. You're running it off of an emulator. There's no really good way to transfer Pokemon into it. On top of that, the Pokemon games now, the stat mechanics are vastly different to the way they were in Red, Blue, and Gold and Silver. So, they're just not compatible with each other. But this leaves us with a situation where we only have rental Pokemon. So, it gets rid of that dynamic of you played your Pokemon games, you played the Pokemon story in Red, Blue, Yellow, and then you want to take that experience you had there and take those Pokemon and put them into this 3D battle simulation game where they have their own individual animations and really cool things. And now you just get to choose these pre-built Pokemon, rental Pokemon that you have no attachment to. And also don't really have the best movesets. A lot of the times the pre-evolved Pokemon have very good moves, whereas the fully evolved ones don't. For example, Blastoise moveset is Seismic Toss, Hydro Pump, Skull Bash, and Withdraw. Now, this isn't the worst set in the world, but it's obviously not the best. Another one to look at is Kadabra and Alakazam. Alakazam being the fully evolved form. Instead of getting Psychic like Kadabra gets, he gets Psybeam, which is significantly weaker at only 65 base attack. And with their speed tiers, Kadabra is still 105 base speed, so still in a very solid speed tier, and honestly makes it a better rental Pokemon. So honestly, it makes the game a little bit more challenging than necessary, especially when you're not even getting the option to pick the moves or play the game the way you want to, or have the attachment of using the Pokemon you trained up in the full games. So it almost doesn't feel like it'll be worth it or that fun to try and complete the entirety of Pokemon Stadium in this way. Another cut feature here involving the transfer pack that I loved in the original N64 Pokemon Stadium was being able to play your Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver on the TV. It was very similar to the Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo, which you could play the Pokemon games on there as well. But this gave you an option to do that on the Nintendo 64. It did only work with Pokemon games, so you couldn't play all your Game Boy games on it, like on the Super Game Boy. But it was still a really fun option, and I would actually do that quite frequently. I actually probably spent more hours playing the Game Boy Pokemon games on my transfer pack using Pokemon Stadium than I actually spent playing Pokemon Stadium itself. While struggling through AI opponents while using Pokemon with suboptimal movesets doesn't sound like a great time, I do think the multiplayer in Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo Switch Online does sound like it could be a good time. The only thing that makes it still flawed is that Pokemon Stadium had a move select that was suboptimal. I don't know that there was a better workaround or way to fix it, but essentially each one of the moves was designated to one of the C buttons, the little yellow buttons on the N64 controller, and it wouldn't show your moves on the screen because, you know, you'd want to hide it from your opponent what you're going to use, but the only way to see it was to pop it up on the screen. Otherwise, you'd have to have it all memorized. And honestly, you're not going to be memorizing all of these rental sets and what designated C button that move is going to be on. But beyond that, I do think the multiplayer will be really fun for Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo Switch Online. Because before, multiplayer was confined to just the one console. Now you can play it online with your friends, or even if you were just playing local, you each get your own Switch, and you can play each other, you know, in different parts of your house, you know, or across the world. So just giving it that online makes it more accessible and more fun to play multiplayer. And on top of that, I do think the rental sets lend themselves to actually be fun, because Pokemon Stadium, you know, it's not like now where you have the competitive sets and you can kind of customize your stats to use Pokemon different ways. Back then, the stats system didn't work that way, and you know, it was a much more casual setting. If you're playing more like competitive, you'd have to be like really try hard and just using the strongest Pokemon in the game, and it would be a very limited tier of Pokemon, and honestly, it's still not a super competitive game. And honestly, the rental Pokemon do lend themselves to that more casual, almost party-esque type of battling where anyone could pick it up and probably do pretty well. I mean, there's some Pokemon in the rental teams that are far better than others, but you know, as long as everyone's not picking the same things and doing the same Pokemon every time, or just using the ones that are kind of in that upper tier of how they've built these rental Pokemon, it could actually be super fun and really a laid back game to play with your friends. And actually, to the best part of Pokemon Stadium multiplayer, the mini games. I loved playing the mini games multiplayer as a kid. You know, it was this very little, like, almost Mario Party-esque type mini games. And no, there wasn't like a board or whatever to add more depth to the mini games, but you could just play the mini games with up to 4 people, and it was a really good time. And you know, I really think they added these games just to kind of flesh out the content, because Pokemon Stadium didn't have a story, and you want something a little bit more than just the battle simulation, and the mini games were just that. And I think being able to play them online with friends is super cool. Like, if you don't want to play Mario Party, but you want to play mini games, Pokemon Stadium isn't a bad option for that. So that, I think, will be super fun, especially being able to play online with up to 4 people. It's super cool. It shouldn't be super taxing to play it online. I know that some of the emulated N64 games work better than others when you're playing online, and even like the Super Nintendo and NES ones, playing those emulators online, sometimes they're hit or miss. But I do think it'll be pretty fun to give it a shot. With all that being said, I don't know that these additions to the Nintendo Switch Online service really move the meter for me. I currently only pay for the base Nintendo Switch Online so I can play my Switch games online, and I get the NES and SNES Nintendo Switch Online consoles, which I think is enough of a service. I don't necessarily think right now that it's worth paying the extra money to get the N64 and Genesis consoles added onto that service. And even with Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Stadium 2, I still don't know that makes it worth it for me. But you know what? Maybe you completely disagree with me. Maybe you think these will be amazing, and that's fine. I think there are people who will really enjoy these additions to the service, but for me, I don't think they're bad additions. I just don't know that for me if it's really worth it or how much time I would actually invest into these titles. But let me know what you think down in the comments. You're all flawless, and I'll see you next time. Bye.